Preparation K is so funny, but with such invaluable advice as well. This is the 9th episode of Kirstie Alley's Big Life, and as always, there will be spoilers as I go through things chronologically and share some thoughts along the way. I thought this was a really strong episode, and this one is all about animals. It actually starts off with the lemurs having had their babies, and I don't think I'd ever seen lemur babies before, and they are so adorable. And Kirstie begins to worry that the household might not be ready for an emergency. So she gets hold of a megaphone and announces that they're having a drill for an emergency situation, and everybody starts to obviously go into panic mode, and there are about 10,000 animal cages as they try to get the pets out of the house, and it's utter chaos, and it's hilarious to watch, but obviously in a genuine emergency situation, it might be a bit of a problem. And Kirstie decides to declare the next week with the motto, be prepared. And it's going to be about making sure that they actually can succeed at getting everybody and every animal out in an emergency situation. And her face when Kyle asked her which animals she loved the most, so they knew which ones to prioritise, I absolutely loved it. And she comes up with what I think is a fun idea. I wish we got to see the second attempt. She asks them, well, tells them, I guess, to make a book with photos of all of the animals so that they can do a head count, which seems like a smart idea, I guess. I mean, you probably know, well, I was going to say you know how many animals you have, but it seems like there are many, many of them. And they make this book and we get to see a bit of it. I wish we'd got to see the second attempt because they were told the book wasn't good enough. The photos were not great and some of the animals were misnamed. But the attempts to get the photos were fabulous, particularly Kyle's. Kyle was taking photos of the dogs and they were just not having it and licking themselves. And it was fabulous. Really good fun. And if you do have a lot of animals, I don't know, maybe it's a good idea. You'd have to remember to take the book out with you in an emergency situation. Maybe attach it to one of the animals' cages. I've got no idea. Meanwhile, Jim is teaching True to change a tire. We'll come back to Jim and True several times throughout this episode. Kirstie then invites over a woman called Denise, who is a pet first aid expert. And I think this is probably the most valuable part of the episode, because they're all sitting around in a circle, well, kind of a semicircle, and most of them have stuffed animals. Kirstie has a real dog, and she's teaching them first aid for pets and how to do kind of modified version of the Heimlich maneuver and to blow air into their nostrils, which honestly I probably wouldn't have thought to do. I mean, if I had to give first aid to a dog, I'd have no idea what I was doing. It probably would be more dangerous for me to do that. But I never would have thought to blow into the nostrils, certainly not in a panic situation. So that was something that was really interesting and some really invaluable advice as well. It was funny as well. We managed to get some comedy out of it, but it was also, I think, really important and a credit to the episode. Meanwhile, True and Jim are doing martial arts. We then have a fire scenario. Kirstie gives Kyle this scenario where he can't get out of the room and he needs to get the the pets out safely. And honestly, it was a panic situation. I don't know what I would have done, but he begins to throw the stuffed animals out of the window. And then eventually he lowers down a pet cage, a pet carrier. And actually, this is the reason why, not because of this episode, but I do have a pet carrier on both floors of my house. I have one downstairs and I have one upstairs in case there is an emergency situation. And I think it's a really sensible thing to do. Obviously, not everybody is going to have the means of having multiple pet carriers, but if you do, I would definitely recommend, as I practice, having one on both floors because you never know. And we also learned from this episode that throwing the animals out of the window, probably not the best solution. Kyle then eventually ends up lowering the animals in this cat carrier or pet carrier down the side of the house. And I guess the sensible thing there would be to keep some rope or some string next to the pet carrier, which I don't do. Maybe I should do that because honestly, I don't know what my solution would be to lower the cat out of the window. So actually, some food for thought there. I might actually I might actually act on that, which is definitely a really strong takeaway from this. Meanwhile, Jim and Kyle are fishing. Kirstie then brings somebody over who can actually simulate a fire situation, which is my worst nightmare. I am pyrophobic. It would make me panic, which I guess is kind of the point, to show how you would react in that situation, but it would make me ill. It would make me very unwell. Please never do this to me. But they managed to get out, and it kind of suggests that actually all of the practicing and the rehearsing and the drills paid off, and it was nice to see them succeeding. Meanwhile, Jim and True are camping, and I feel like what Jim and True were doing were not necessarily the most hilarious things, but because we would see people at the house working so hard to overcome these obstacles and find solutions to problems, and then we just cut to Jim and True doing bizarre things. I mean, they're pretty average things in general, but within the context of the episode, I had no idea where they would take it from one moment to the next, and it was delightful to see. And the episode ends with them deciding they're not going to camp outside, even though they are on the property, and Jim shows True how to pick the lock of the door because they've been locked out, and the alarm goes off, and it was a decent way to end things. Very, very funny episode, but also with some really important points and some really great food for thought and advice. And even if it just makes anybody assess their own evacuation plan for their pets, I think that that's a really great thing. Some pets are going to be more cooperative than others. And certainly, as Kirstie pointed out at the beginning of the episode, that a fire came very close to her house at one point. I actually Googled it. The image they use in the documentary is the same image in an article about the Griffith Park fire of 2007. So I'm assuming that's what she's talking about, particularly since this house borders Griffith Park. And obviously that's not just a small kitchen fire or something that's going to be easily controlled. These are catastrophic, potentially serious disasters. And obviously not everybody's going to have a house that backs onto this giant park. But at the same time, you never know what kind of disaster could happen. And I can't remember the point I was trying to make with this, but either way, it's really important to be able to have an evacuation plan for your pets, whether you have one pet or 10,000 pets. And I think there's some really great advice and some really great takeaways in this episode, in this documentary, and they managed to deliver all of that with a lot of humour as well, and that helps to make it engaging and entertaining and memorable. And I think every pet owner, and I speak for myself as well, every pet owner should be encouraged to go on a pet first aid course. I never have. I honestly wouldn't know what to do in an emergency, and I kind of feel inspired by this episode to look into that. And I think I'm going to do that, and also think about getting some string to lower my cat's carrier down in the case of emergency. Pretty invaluable episode, let's be honest, and I rather enjoyed it as well. I can't fault it, as much as I would have hated to have been involved in a lot of the activities in this episode. Preparation K is pretty fabulous.